The night air crackled with tension as the glow of torches flickered against the towering stone walls of Carthage. A hush fell over the gathered crowd as masked priests emerged, their robes stained with symbols of gods long feared by outsiders. At the center of the courtyard stood an altar, its surface worn smooth by centuries of unimaginable offerings. What happened next would send shockwaves through the ancient world, a ritual so unsettling that Greek historians would later refuse to believe it, and Roman generals would use it as proof of Carthage's barbarity. This was no ordinary ceremony. This was the dark heart of a civilization that thrived on defying expectations, a people whose religious practices blurred the line between devotion and defiance. Carthage wasn't just another empire, it was a mystery wrapped in terror, a city that dared to worship in ways that left its neighbors both fascinated and horrified. While the Greeks praised reason and the Romans built their pantheon on order, the Carthaginians whispered to older, darker gods. Their rituals weren't just performances, they were acts of power designed to unsettle, to provoke, and to dominate the imagination of anyone who heard of them. Imagine a world where fire wasn't just an element but a living deity, where children weren't just blessed but bound to the divine in ways that still make historians shudder. This was the Carthage that Greece and Rome desperately tried to forget, and the one we're about to uncover. Today we're pulling back the veil on 30 of Carthage's most shocking rituals, ceremonies so far outside the norms of the ancient world that they were buried by time, erased by conquerors, or whispered about only in the darkest corners of history. From sacrifices that defied logic to rites that blurred the line between human and divine, these practices weren't just strange, they were strategic, designed to cement Carthage's reputation as a civilization not to be trifled with. So if you're ready to step into the shadows of history, to walk where even the bravest ancients feared to tread, then let's begin this journey into the rituals that shocked the world. Of all Carthage's rituals, none provoked more outrage or more debate than the sacrifices made to Baal Hammon. At the heart of this controversy lies the Tophet, a sacred burial ground where the charred remains of infants and young children were found stacked in urns by the thousands. The air here still carries the weight of those ancient offerings, a silent testament to a practice so shocking that even Carthage's fiercest enemies struggled to comprehend it. Greek historian Diodorus Siculus wrote of mothers handing their children to priests without shedding a tear, of flames consuming small bodies as drums drowned out their cries. The Romans, no strangers to brutality themselves, used these accounts to paint Carthage as a land of monsters, but the truth, as always, is more complicated. For the Carthaginians, this wasn't senseless cruelty, it was the highest act of devotion. Baal Hammon, the city's chief god, demanded absolute loyalty, and what greater offering could there be than the life of one's own child? These sacrifices weren't random acts of desperation, they were carefully orchestrated ceremonies, performed in times of crisis or great need, to secure the god's favor. The Tophet was no hidden horror, it stood at the center of Carthaginian life, a grim reminder of the covenant between the people and their deity, yet modern archaeologists still argue over what really happened here. Some scholars insist the bones tell a different story, that many of the children were stillborn or died young from natural causes, their remains later dedicated to Baal Hammon in a symbolic gesture. Others point to chemical analysis showing signs of deliberate burning, supporting the ancient accounts. What's undeniable is the scale, row upon row of urns, each holding tiny bones, stretching across centuries. Whether these sacrifices were as widespread as Rome claimed or a rare, ritualized act, they cemented Carthage's reputation as a place where faith crossed lines others wouldn't dare approach. And that was the point. In a world where religion was as much about power as piety, Carthage's willingness to go to extremes sent a message. To outsiders, it was barbarism. To the Carthaginians, it was proof of their unshakable resolve, a warning that no cost was too high in defense of their city, their gods, their way of life. The Tophet wasn't just a burial ground, it was a statement. The excavations at Carthage's Tophet sanctuary revealed layers of history so unsettling they forced the modern world to confront a question the ancient one had already answered: what really happened here? Beneath the dry earth of modern-day Tunisia, archaeologists uncovered row after row of small, weathered urns, each containing fragments of charred bone. Some held the remains of infants barely old enough to survive outside the womb, others the bones of children up to 3 or 4 years old. What silenced diggers wasn't just the age of the deceased, but the sheer volume: thousands of urns stacked in careful grids, some marked with stelae bearing inscriptions like, "To Baal Hammon, Lord of the Sky, offered by his servant." Modern science has peeled back another layer of this mystery. Isotopic analysis of the teeth found in these urns tells a haunting story. Some remains show traces of malnutrition or illness, suggesting these children may have already been near death when they were brought to the Tophet. Others, however, show no such signs: healthy teeth, healthy bones, abruptly ended, and then there's the fire. The patterns of carbonization on the bones leave little doubt: some were burned alive. The question isn't just whether the Carthaginians practiced child sacrifice, but how often, and under what circumstances. The stelae add another chilling dimension. These carved stones, often placed above the urns, carry dedications in Carthage's distinct script. Some thank Baal for answered prayers, a military victory, a bountiful harvest implying the sacrifice was part of a bargain. Others simply list the names of the children, a stark reminder that these weren't anonymous offerings but someone's sons and daughters. One of the most heartbreaking reads, "For the Lady Tanit, and for Baal, that which was vowed," followed by a child's name. There's no ambiguity here: these were gifts, not burials, yet controversy still simmers. A handful of scholars argue the Tophet was simply a cemetery for children who died young, their cremations part of a symbolic offering rather than a direct killing. They point to the presence of stillborn infants, or to animal bones mixed in, suggesting some rites may have allowed substitutes, but the counter-evidence is overwhelming. Ancient authors like Diodorus and Plutarch describe the rituals in grim detail: how parents had to show no grief during the ceremony, how the fires were stoked to drown out sound. Even the layout of the Tophet defies ordinary burial customs. The urns weren't spaced like graves but clustered in layers, new deposits placed directly atop old ones, as if accumulating favor with the gods over centuries. Perhaps the most telling clue comes from Carthage itself. When the city faced its final destruction at Roman hands in 146 BCE, the Tophet received a sudden, frantic influx of new offerings. The final layer of urns dates to that exact year: tiny bones mixed with the ash of a dying civilization. In the end, even Carthage's darkest rituals couldn't save it. But they did ensure one thing: that this city and its gods would never be forgotten. Beneath the pale glow of Carthaginian moonlight, another ritual unfolded, one so visceral it blurred the line between worship and madness. This was the Blood Orgy of Tanit, a ceremony dedicated to the city's enigmatic mother goddess, whose symbols of crescent moons and open hands hinted at both fertility and ferocity. Unlike the calculated horrors of the Tophet, Tanit's rites were chaotic, intoxicating, a whirlwind of ecstatic movement and raw devotion. Cleitarchus, a Greek historian who dared to document what others dismissed as rumor, described nights where the air thickened with the metallic scent of blood and the rhythmic pounding of bare feet against earth. Participants, their bodies smeared with ash and ochre, danced until their muscles gave way, chanting hymns that called the goddess down from the stars. The climax of the ritual was as shocking as it was sacred. Devotees would slash their own arms or shoulders with ritual blades, not in punishment but in offering, their blood collected in chalices and shared among the crowd. To drink it was to commune with Tanit herself, to absorb her power directly, but this wasn't mere savagery, it was sacrament. The Carthaginians believed blood carried the essence of life, and by sharing it, they bound themselves to the goddess and to each other in an unbreakable covenant. Some accounts speak of hallucinogenic brews, mixtures of fermented honey and unknown herbs, gulped down to dissolve the veil between worlds. Visions of Tanit were said to follow, her form shifting between nurturing mother and avenging spirit, her voice whispering promises or warnings in the throbbing dark. What unsettled outsiders most wasn't just the blood, but the abandon. Unlike the rigidly controlled sacrifices to Baal Hammon, Tanit's rites thrived on chaos. Self-flagellation with knotted ropes, frenzied writhing interpreted as divine possession, even acts of public coupling, all were woven into the night's tapestry. Claytorchus wrote of participants collapsing at dawn, their bodies a map of scratches and bruises, their eyes wide with something between terror and transcendence. To the Greeks, such unrestrained devotion was indecent, proof of Carthage's moral decay, yet to those who took part it was the opposite, a rejection of order in favor of raw, unfiltered connection with the divine. Archeology offers tantalizing clues to support these ancient texts. Excavations near Carthage harbors uncovered hidden chambers lined with drainage channels, perfect for washing away the evidence of such messy ceremonies. Among the rubble, votive figurines of Tanit were found stained with substances modern tests identified as iron oxide, likely residue from blood offerings. Most telling are the inscriptions on broken stelae nearby, phrases like "Tanit of the night" and "she who drinks with us," hinting at rituals too potent to be conducted under the scrutiny of daylight. The Blood Orgy of Tanit wasn't just a ritual, it was rebellion. In a civilization known for its mercantile precision and military discipline, these nights of abandon served as a release valve, a way to touch something wilder than Carthage's carefully constructed identity. And perhaps that duality was the point to prove that even the most polished empire still had a pulse of primal hunger beneath its surface. While Rome built its altars to reason and law, Carthage kept a space for the untamable, for the goddess who demanded not just reverence, but rapture. While the blood rites of Tanit stirred whispers of madness, Carthage hid another practice behind temple walls, one that blurred sacred devotion with earthly desire. The Temple of Astarte stood as a monument to fertility, its marble columns draped in garlands of pomegranates and figs, symbols of abundance, but inside, the rituals took a form that would scandalize Rome for centuries. Here, priestesses known as hierojules performed acts that defied simple categorization, part worship, part commerce, wholly Carthaginian. These women weren't ordinary temple attendants, they were living bridges between the divine and mortal realms, their bodies considered vessels of Astarte's blessings. To lie with a hierojule wasn't mere indulgence, it was communion. Roman historians like Livy recoiled at the practice, painting it as proof of Carthage's moral decay. Yet what they dismissed as debauchery held deep spiritual significance. Astarte, goddess of love and war, demanded offerings of passion as well as prayer. Payment wasn't for the act itself, but for the temple's upkeep, a system that funded Astarte's cult while redistributing wealth across Carthage's rigid class lines. Surviving ledgers etched on clay tablets reveal meticulous records, dates, names, even amounts as small as a handful of bronze coins from sailors or farmers. One fragment lists a donation of 3 silver shekels for the favor of the lady's grace, alongside a crude drawing of 2 intertwined figures. Archaeology sheds light on what texts only hint at. Beneath the temple's ruins, excavators found terracotta figurines with exaggerated sexual features, likely used in fertility rites or as votives. More startling were the narrow chambers lining the inner sanctum, their walls adorned with frescoes of Astarte receiving offerings, not of fruit or incense, but of entwined lovers. A hidden alcove yielded a cache of seashells, ancient symbols of femininity, each hollowed out to hold perfumed oils. These weren't the trappings of a brothel, but the tools of a liturgy that celebrated creation itself. The hierojule's influence stretched far beyond Carthage. Greek colonies in Sicily adopted similar rites for Aphrodite, while in Cyprus, Astarte's counterpart was worshipped with equal fervor. Even Israel's prophets railed against her cult, proof of its pervasive pull. What Rome condemned as vulgar, the Mediterranean world recognized as power, the kind that could unite peasant and merchant, soldier and scholar, in shared devotion. The Temple of Astarte didn't just shock outsiders, it reminded them that Carthage's gods demanded more than distant reverence. They wanted flesh, breath, and heartbeat. And perhaps that was the true provocation. In a world where Rome's Vestal virgins pledged lifelong chastity, Carthage's sacred servants wielded sexuality as a form of divine authority. Their rituals weren't hidden away but celebrated in festivals where the city's elite and commoners alike gathered to honor Astarte's dual nature, giver of life, taker of war. The hierodules didn't merely serve the goddess, they embodied her. When the temple finally fell to Roman siege, its last recorded act was the burning of its own archives, as if Carthage would rather let flames preserve its secrets than let conquerors define them. Every spring, when the Mediterranean winds turned restless, Carthage's harbor became a stage for one of the ancient world's most bewildering spectacles. A bull, its horns sheathed in gold, its hide draped in crimson cloth, was led onto a lavishly decorated barge as crowds gathered along the shore. Chants rose like waves as priests anointed the animal with oils and wine, whispering invocations not to Poseidon, as Greek observers assumed, but to Yam, the Phoenician god of primordial chaos, ruler of storms and unseen depths. Then, with a sudden lurch, the barge was scuttled, sending the bull plunging into the foaming water. To Roman chroniclers, it was an absurd waste of wealth. To the Carthaginians, it was the only language the sea would understand. This ritual, known as the drowning of the sacred bull, wasn't about destruction, it was about balance. Yam demanded tribute from what Carthage held most precious, its maritime prowess. Bulls symbolized strength and fertility, gold embodied wealth, and their deliberate surrender to the depths was a bargaining chip with a deity who could either grant safe passage or summon hurricanes. Phoenician tablets from Tyre describe similar rites centuries earlier, where sailors offered prized livestock to the swallower before embarking on treacherous voyages. Carthage had merely refined the practice into a public spectacle, a reminder that their empire's fate was tied to the sea's whims. Roman accounts mock the ritual as proof of Carthaginian extravagance. Pliny the Elder scoffed at the gilded folly of drowning something so valuable, while Polybius framed it as superstition overshadowing reason. What these critics missed was the precision behind the symbolism. The bull wasn't just thrown overboard, it was escorted by a flotilla of warships, its sinking time to the turning tide, a choreography meant to mirror Yam's cyclical nature. Even the gold had purpose, as a conductor, carrying prayers faster into the abyss, and it worked. Carthaginian naval logs, preserved on watertight cedar tablets, show a curious pattern: fewer shipwrecks in the months following the ceremony. Coincidence, perhaps, but in a world where gods felt as real as the wind, that was evidence enough. Modern dredging near Carthage's ancient ports has unearthed relics that breathe life into these accounts. Divers recovered a gold-capped bull's horn encrusted with barnacles, its surface etched with Phoenician script, for Yam who gives and takes. Nearby, a marble pedestal bears the footprints of a sacrificial animal, its grooves worn smooth by centuries of hooves. Most haunting is a mosaic from a seaside villa, depicting the ritual in vivid detail, the bull serene as the waves close overhead, its body framed by swirling patterns that mimic both storm clouds and the folds of a god's cloak. The drowning of the sacred bull wasn't just a sacrifice, it was theater, diplomacy, and high-stakes negotiation rolled into one. While Rome's gods demanded obedience, Carthage demanded partnership. And in the quiet after the bull vanished beneath the waves, the city waited for the calm waters that would signal Yam's acceptance, or the tempest that would remind them no offering could ever tame the sea entirely. In the shadowed halls of Carthage temples, where incense curled like serpents around stone pillars, a ritual unfolded so visceral it defied even Rome's capacity for brutality. This was the skin mask ceremony, a practice so chilling that early Christian writer Tertullian would later describe it as the devil's own theater. Victims, often prisoners of war or condemned criminals, were led before priests of Baal Hammon, their bodies anointed with sacred oils. Then came the flaying knives, bronze blades honed to split skin from muscle in a single, practiced motion, but this wasn't mere execution. The priests would carefully peel away the victim's flesh like a garment, donning the still warm hides as macabre vestments. Draped in this grisly attire, they entered trances, channeling the dead to prophesy Carthage's future. Tertullian's accounts paint a grotesque picture: priests dancing in their borrowed skins, the faces of the dead lolling over their own like melted wax, their voices shifting between human and something. What horrified outsiders wasn't just the violence, but the precision. The skins weren't torn haphazardly, they were removed whole, often starting from the back to preserve the victim's facial likeness. Frescoes from Carthage's underground shrines show figures clad in flayed flesh, their hands raised as if conjuring visions from the blood-slicked air. Yet beneath the horror lay a profound theology. In Near Eastern traditions from which Carthage drew much of its religious DNA, skin represented the boundary between worlds. By wearing another's flesh, the priest became a living threshold, neither fully mortal nor fully spirit, able to navigate realms beyond human sight. The victim's agonized death was seen as a rupture in the fabric of reality, a doorway pried open through suffering. Parallels abound in ancient Mesopotamia, where Assyrian texts describe shamans wrapping themselves in the skins of sacrificed bulls to commune with storm gods. Even the Bible's book of Ezekiel mentions prophets clad in the skins of the slain to hear divine whispers. Archeology offers fragments of this grim puzzle. Excavations near Carthage's necropolis uncovered flint knives with microscopic traces of human collagen, their edges worn smooth from repeated use. A stash of terracotta masks, eerily detailed with individual wrinkles and scars, suggests some victims may have been memorialized after the ritual. Most telling is a burial site where 3 priests were interred wearing strange, leather-like shrouds. Analysis revealed they were treated with tannins, a crude form of preservation. Were these the remains of practitioners who spent their lives stepping in and out of death's skin? The symbolism of rebirth coursed through every step of the ceremony. Just as a snake sheds its skin to renew itself, Carthage believed its priests could slough off mortal limitations by adopting another's flesh. The victim's death wasn't an end but a transformation, their essence funneled into the service of the city's survival. When Roman envoys recounted these rites to the Senate, they framed them as madness, but to Carthage they were the ultimate act of pragmatism, proof that no boundary, not even the one between living and dead, would stand in the way of their destiny. And perhaps that was the true terror of the skin mask ceremony, not the blood, not the peeling flesh, but the cold calculus behind it. Carthage didn't just worship its gods, it bargained with them, offering horrors in exchange for power. While Rome built its auguries on bird flights and star charts, Carthage prophets spoke with the voices of the flayed, their prophecies etched not in stars, but in scars. Bare feet slapped against scorched stone as a line of devotees advanced toward the towering bronze statue of Moloch, its outstretched hands glowing from the bed of coals beneath. This was no ordinary procession, it was a trial by fire, a ritual seared into Carthage's spiritual identity. The air shimmered with heat, the scent of burning flesh mingling with the metallic tang of the god's statue, its hollow eyes reflecting the flames. Participants, their faces smeared with ash, didn't flinch as they stepped onto the embers. Instead they sang, their voices rising in hypnotic chants that seemed to sync with the crackling fire. Outsiders swore these walkers were immune to pain, but the truth was more complex. This wasn't magic, it was mastery. Ancient accounts describe how devotees prepared for months, hardening their feet with salt rubs and bitter herbs, their minds trained through fasting and rhythmic drumming to enter dissociative states. Greek physician Dioscorides, who witnessed the ritual during Carthage's trading heyday, wrote of participants whose pupils dilated like those in fever dreams, their pulse rates slowing even as their skin met burning coal. The secret wasn't supernatural, it was neurological. By inducing trances, the priests triggered a flood of endorphins and adrenaline, numbing pain while heightening focus. The coals themselves were carefully selected. Olive wood burns hotter, but leaves a thin ash layer that insulates briefly, allowing swift, calculated steps. The spectacle left an indelible mark on history. Roman cults of Mithras later incorporated fire walking into initiation rites, their underground temples decorated with mosaics of robed figures treading flames, a clear echo of Carthage's rituals. Medieval European folklore spun tales of saints who walked unscathed through bonfires, their miracles suspiciously reminiscent of Moloch's devotees. Even the infamous trial by ordeal, where accused criminals proved innocence by surviving fire, may trace its roots to these North African rites. Carthage's influence stretched far beyond its military reach, seeping into the spiritual DNA of empires that claimed to despise it. Archeology offers eerie confirmation. Excavations near Moloch's temple revealed a sunken processional path lined with layers of compacted ash and charcoal, its stones permanently stained reddish-black from centuries of heat. Among the debris, researchers found sandals with soles worn thin on the balls of the feet, proof that participants didn't just dash across but moved with deliberate, practiced steps. Most haunting were the votive offerings left at the statue's base, tiny bronze feet, some blistered in depiction, left by those who'd survived the walk. What began as a test of faith became something far more potent, a psychological weapon. When Roman envoys reported back about citizens who danced unharmed on fire, it wasn't just curiosity they stirred but fear. Carthage's rituals weren't just acts of devotion, they were demonstrations of control over pain, over fear, over the very elements Rome claimed to command. To walk through fire unscathed was to declare that even the laws of nature bent to Carthage's will, and in a world where gods and men battled for dominance, that was a message no empire could ignore. At midnight on the first crescent moon of each month, Carthage streets emptied as families retreated into windowless chambers, carrying platters of roasted lamb, figs steeped in honey, and jugs of pomegranate wine. But these feasts weren't for the living. In total darkness, they laid their offerings before eerily lifelike effigies, statues carved with the exact scars, wrinkles, and even the receding hairlines of their departed ancestors. Silence was absolute. A single cough, a whisper, even the scrape of a sandal could break the ritual's sacred tension. For the next hour they waited in the void, listening for the faintest sound of shifting plates, or the wet smack of lips they could almost convince themselves were real. This was the silent banquet, where Carthaginians didn't just honor their dead, they fed them. Greek and Roman observers shuddered at the practice, where Mediterranean cultures left token offerings of milk or grain at ancestral graves. Carthage treated its dead like capricious houseguests who might turn violent if neglected. Tomb inscriptions warned of spirits gnawing with empty teeth, or licking the walls with tongues of dust when left unfed. A recovered clay tablet from a merchant's villa lists the favorite dishes of 6 generations of ancestors: spiced goat for grandfather Hanno, salted fish for great-aunt Dido, as meticulously as a chef's ledger. The message was clear. In Carthage, death didn't end familial duty. Archaeologists digging beneath Carthage's residential districts found evidence that blurred the line between ritual and reality. Hidden beneath floor mosaics were small, ventilated chambers packed with effigy fragments, terracotta heads with removable jaws, wooden hands hinged at the wrists, suggesting some families manipulated the statues during meals to simulate feeding. Chemical analysis of these relics revealed traces of olive oil and myrrh, likely used to keep joints movable for centuries. Most chilling were the tooth marks. Several effigies showed where patterns consistent with decades of actual bites being taken from their mouths, as if generations of Carthaginians periodically nibbled the offerings to prime them for spectral consumption. The silent banquet's psychological grip was undeniable. While Rome's ancestor cult celebrated stoic virtue, Carthage's dead were neither benevolent guides nor distant memories. They were presences needy, jealous, and intimately involved in daily life. A breach in ritual could mean a withered harvest, a stillborn child, or the nightmare whispers of bone tongues described in cursed tablets. This wasn't superstition, it was a contractual relationship with the unseen world, one that demanded as much attention as treaties with living kings. And perhaps that was Carthage's true divergence. Where other cultures sought to tidy death away behind marble monuments, Carthage set a place for it at the table. The silent banquet didn't just acknowledge the dead, it made them stakeholders in the city's survival. When Rome finally razed Carthage, they missed the hidden dining chambers beneath the rubble. The last effigies still sit there today, their plates empty, waiting for a feast that will never come. Beneath the waves off Sicily's coast, marine archaeologists made a discovery that sent chills through the academic world. Rusted iron shackles fused to the splintered remains of ancient warships, their corroded locks still clenched tight as if holding invisible captives. This was no ordinary wreckage. These were the ghosts of Carthage's most brutal naval ritual, a practice so extreme even battle-hardened Roman sailors whispered about it in dread. Before critical engagements, Carthaginian admirals would select prisoners, often captured enemies or rebellious subjects, and chain them to the prow of their warships as living figureheads. These weren't mere decorations, they were sacrifices, human offerings to the tempestuous sea god Yam, who demanded proof of devotion before granting victory. The ritual reached its infamous zenith at the Battle of the Agadi Islands in 241 BCE, where Carthage's fleet faced Rome in a clash that would decide the First Punic War. According to fragmentary accounts recovered from Greek mercenaries' diaries, the Carthaginian flagship emerged from morning mist with a horror lashed to its bow, a Gaulish chieftain, his limbs spread-eagled against the ram, his chest carved with invocations to Yam in charcoal and salt. As oars churned the water into froth, priests anointed the prisoner's forehead with fish blood, their chants syncing with the drumbeat that propelled the ship forward. The moment battle commenced, the first Roman arrow intended for the Carthaginian crew struck the Gaul instead, triggering a gruesome sequence. His agonized thrashing wasn't just suffering, it was divination. The direction of his spasms, the pitch of his screams, even the angle at which blood sprayed across the waves, all were interpreted as omens guiding the admiral's tactics. Divers examining the Agadi wreckage found evidence that corroborates these grisly tales. Among the shattered timbers lay ceremonial daggers with curved blades designed for ritual cuts that wouldn't immediately kill, their edges nicked from scraping against bone. Most damning were the shackles. Unlike standard prisoner restraints, these featured interior spikes that bit into flesh with every movement, ensuring the sacrifice remained conscious through the battle's entirety. Even more telling, their placement. These weren't anchored deep within the hull where captives would typically be held, but bolted directly beneath the prow's waterline, positioning the victim where splintering wood and crushing waves would maximize their torment. But to dismiss this as mere barbarity misses Carthage's chilling logic. Naval warfare was chaos, a realm where wind, current, and luck held more sway than skill. By offering Yam a front-row seat to human suffering, Carthage transformed its warships into floating altars. The prisoner's agony became a beacon, drawing the god's attention and, hopefully, his favor. Contemporary Roman accounts mock the practice as cowardice, but Carthage's naval dominance for centuries suggests otherwise. Their admirals understood something Rome initially didn't. In the unforgiving Mediterranean, survival required bargaining with forces beyond mortal control. The wrecks near Sicily tell a final, ironic twist. Analysis of the shackles revealed something unexpected. Some were sized for children, while most prisoners were warriors. During desperate times, even younger captives were sacrificed. One set of small corroded manacles still cradled a silver amulet of Tanit, likely torn from a child's neck during the sinking. It's a haunting reminder that Carthage's rituals weren't about cruelty for its own sake, but about a civilization so fiercely committed to survival that it would abandon every boundary humanity, mercy, even innocence, to keep its head above water. And in the end, perhaps that was the true horror Rome could never forgive, not the blood, not the chains, but the terrifying fact that for centuries, it worked. The scent of blood hung thick in the humid air of Carthage's temple of Eshmun, as priests clustered around a freshly slaughtered ram, their knives glinting in the torchlight. This wasn't merely a sacrifice, it was a dialogue with the divine, written in the language of organs and entrails. Carthaginian haruspicy, the art of divining the future through animal viscera, wasn't just a ritual, it was a high-stakes science, refined over centuries to eclipse even the famed Babylonian practices that inspired it. The priests moved with surgical precision, their fingers tracing the liver's lobes like cartographers mapping unseen realms. Every bulge, every discoloration, every quiver of the gallbladder was a syllable in the god's cryptic message. And Carthage's diviners had become fluent. Pliny the Elder, ever the skeptic, grudgingly recorded their most chilling successes. In one account, Carthaginian priests foresaw the eruption of Mount Etna weeks in advance by noting a peculiar black vein threading through a sacrificial ox's heart, a sign they interpreted as the mountain's rage. Another prediction, etched on a recovered lead tablet, warned of a coming plague after 3 consecutive sheep livers bore identical cysts, like grapes clustered in death. When disaster struck as foretold, even Rome's staunchest rationalists hesitated to dismiss it as coincidence. What set Carthage apart wasn't just the frequency of their accurate prophecies, but the granular detail. Where Babylonian diviners might declare, "A king will fall," Carthage priests could specify the season, the weapon, even the color of the assassin's cloak. The tools of their trade reveal a macabre sophistication. Excavations near the temple uncovered bronze scalpels with blades as thin as fingernails, designed to slice organ membranes without obscuring crucial markings. Beside them lay ceramic models of livers, each section labeled in Phoenician script with corresponding omens, a diviner's training manual in 3 dimensions. One such model, now in the Tunis Museum, shows a sheep's liver divided into 52 zones, each linked to a celestial body or natural element, the most unsettling artifact. A set of silver needles used to probe the spleen's texture, their tips still stained with millennia-old residues of bile and copper, but the ritual's true power lay in its theatricality. Before battle or trade voyages, Carthage's elite would gather to witness the reading, the animal's steaming entrails arranged on a polished obsidian slab. The high priest wouldn't merely recite omens, he'd perform them, using the lungs' inflation to mimic the ebb and flow of tides, or draping the intestines in patterns that mirrored enemy troop movements. A recovered fresco from a merchant's villa captures the moment vividly, a priest holding aloft a dripping liver as a general's face pales, his hand frozen mid-gesture toward a map of Sicily. 3 weeks later, that general's fleet would meet catastrophe off those very shores. Critics argue these predictions were retrospective fabrications, but the evidence suggests otherwise. Carthaginian naval logs show abrupt course changes correlated with haruspicy sessions, avoiding storms or pirate fleets with uncanny timing. Even more compelling are the counter-rituals, ceremonies performed to reverse bad omens, like mixing the blood of a healthy animal with one bearing malformed organs to dilute the misfortune. These weren't the acts of charlatans, but of believers who'd staked their civilization's survival on the certainty that the gods wrote their warnings in flesh. The Romans, for all their mockery, quietly adopted the practice after Carthage's fall. their own haruspices consulting Carthaginian scrolls for centuries. Perhaps as the ultimate testament to the ritual's power, not in its shock value, but in its cold, relentless utility. In a world trembling between chaos and order, Carthage's priests had found a way to make the unseen visible, to hold the future's slippery shape in their blood-smeared hands. And for those who understood its language, the body of a single sheep could whisper secrets that toppled empires. Beneath the cold silver glow of a lunar eclipse, the courtyards of Tanit's temple pulsed with a ritual so extreme, it blurred the line between devotion and delirium. This was the moonlit castration rite, a ceremony where male devotees known as the galley would sever their own genitals with ritual blades, offering their flesh to the goddess in a crescendo of agony and ecstasy. Roman historians like Livy wrote of these nights with a mix of fascination and revulsion, describing how the men's screams were drowned out by frenzied drumming, their blood splattering across moon-washed stones as they danced in spiraling patterns, their severed flesh tossed into sacred fires. To outsiders it was madness, to the galley it was transcendence, an irreversible pact with Tanit that dissolved the boundaries of gender, mortality, and self. The tools of this ritual tell a story of eerie precision. Archaeologists excavating a hidden chamber beneath Carthage's harbor district uncovered a cache of crescent-shaped knives, their edges honed to a razor's sharpness. Beside them lay small bronze cups with drainage holes, devices designed to catch the blood without spilling a single drop, ensuring the offering reached the goddess undiluted. Most haunting was a terracotta relief showing the ritual in progress, a priest holding aloft the severed flesh while the initiate, his face contorted in something between pain and rapture, gripped a crescent blade still slick with blood. The inscription beneath read, "Born again in the lady's shadow." Early Christians, ever adept at absorbing and repurposing pagan symbolism, later twisted this rite into a metaphor for spiritual purity. Church fathers like Tertullian spoke of cutting away worldly desires in sermons that conspicuously mirrored the galley's ecstatic abandon. Even the figure of the self-castrating Saint Origen, though historically disputed, echoes Carthage's ritual's proof that the line between condemnation and appropriation was thinner than a knife's edge. But the moonlit castration rite wasn't just about physical sacrifice, it was a radical rejection of societal norms. In a civilization that prized virility and lineage, the galley became walking paradoxes, neither male nor female, human nor divine. Their wounds marked them as living conduits to Tanit's power, their voices believed to carry her wisdom in rasping, otherworldly tones. When Rome eventually crushed Carthage, they burned the temples but couldn't erase the rite's legacy. Centuries later, in the torchlit groves of Ephesus, followers of Cybele would revive the practice, their cries echoing those of the galley, a ghostly refrain of devotion that refused to die. Perhaps the most revealing clue lies not in artifacts, but in silence. Of the hundreds of inscriptions recovered from Carthage, not a single galley's name survives. They had no tombs, no lineages, no epitaphs. Their offering was total, their identities erased, their voices swallowed by the goddess they served. In the end, the moonlit castration rite wasn't just a ritual. It was an obliteration. Each spring, as the desert winds carried the scent of blooming jasmine through Carthage streets, the city prepared for its most unsettling royal appointment. A single condemned criminal, often a captured enemy soldier or treasonous noble, would be plucked from the dungeons and transformed. Stripped of his identity, he was bathed in rosewater, anointed with sacred oils, and draped in the heavy robes and golden mask of Baal Hammon himself. For 1 year, this living statue would feast on honeyed figs, sleep on silk cushions, and receive obeisance from Carthage's highest officials, but every whispered prayer, every bow, carried a terrible irony. The people weren't worshipping a man, they were fattening a sacrifice. The ritual's roots stretched back to Mesopotamia's substitute king traditions, where a temporary ruler would bear the brunt of bad omens before being quietly executed. But Carthage perfected the concept into psychological theater. By elevating the victim to godhood before his immolation, they created a perverse fairness. How better to honor Baal than with a sacrifice who'd tasted divine privilege. Greek historian Philo of Byblos described the final ceremony in chilling detail, how the living statue would be paraded through cheering crowds one last time, his golden mask reflecting firelight as priests chanted hymns that praised and condemned him in the same breath. Archaeological evidence paints an even darker picture. A set of shackles recovered near the Tophet bear inscriptions indicating they once held the ritual's king. Unlike normal prisoner restraints, these were lined with soft leather to prevent chafing that might displease the god. Diggers also uncovered a trove of food offerings near Baal's temple, their residue analysis revealing absurd luxuries: figs imported from Persia, wine diluted with powdered pearls, even traces of saffron. This wasn't just sustenance, it was a systematic erasure of humanity, turning a man into a vessel too sacred to live. The burning itself was no mere execution, but a carefully staged apotheosis. Eyewitness accounts describe how the victim's golden mask would melt into his flesh, merging mortal and divine in the flames. As the smoke curled skyward, Carthaginians believed Baal literally consumed his earthly double, absorbing both the man's life and his year of accumulated worship. The message was clear: even gods demanded proof of devotion, and Carthage would pay any price to keep theirs satisfied. Modern scholars note a grim parallel in Aztec rituals where victims embodied gods before sacrifice. But Carthage's version added something uniquely sinister: the extended charade of false divinity. Where other cultures saw temporary vessels, Carthage created willing participants. Some kings reportedly begged for the role when famine or plague struck, believing their voluntary sacrifice carried extra potency. A recovered lead curse tablet even boasts of a slave who poisoned rivals to secure his selection, craving that 1 year of glory before the fire. In the end, the living statue ritual wasn't just about appeasement. It was Carthage's most brutal lesson in power, that even gods could be negotiated with, if you offered them the right kind of theater. And as the last golden mask bubbled away to nothing, the crowd didn't mourn, they cheered, because tonight Baal was fed, and tomorrow Carthage would rise stronger. At the height of Carthage's power, when the city's influence stretched across the Mediterranean, its ruling class faced an annual trial that would make even Rome's most hardened senators blanch. The poison trial was no mere test of courage, it was a meticulously choreographed dance with death, where the nobility gathered in the marble halls of the Senate to publicly consume tainted wine. The cups they raised weren't filled with ordinary vintages, but with carefully measured doses of hemlock, belladonna, and other toxins calibrated to induce agony without delivering death. A Greek trader who witnessed the ritual described the scene in scrolls later smuggled to Alexandria. Men who commanded fleets and armies trembled like children as the chalice passed, yet none refused. To do so would be to admit the gods found them unworthy. Modern toxicology has given disturbing credence to these ancient accounts. Ceramic shards recovered from Carthage's government quarter bear faint traces of atropine and caniine alkaloids found in deadly nightshade and poison hemlock. Even more telling are the mineral deposits inside ceremonial mixing vessels, where copper residues suggest a precise science of dilution. These weren't haphazard brews, they were pharmaceutical cocktails designed to push the body to its limits while preserving life. The goal wasn't to kill, but to reveal. Convulsions, vomiting, or loss of bowel control meant disgrace. The gods had rejected the drinker's leadership. Those who endured with stoic silence won not just prestige but political capital, their resilience seen as divine favor made manifest. The trial's psychological brilliance lay in its dual purpose. By submitting voluntarily to torment, the elite proved their commitment to Carthage's survival. At the same time, the ritual became a ruthless meritocracy, weeding out the weak without need for assassinations or coups. A fragmentary inscription from a noble's tomb boasts, Thrice I drank the cup of Baal, and thrice my limbs stayed steady, suggesting some participated multiple times to cement their status. Meanwhile, archaeologists have identified several hastily buried skeletons in Carthage's elite necropolises, showing signs of abrupt, violent deaths around the estimated dates of the ritual, likely those who failed the trial and took their own lives to avoid public shame. What made the poison trial unique wasn't just its brutality, but its theatricality. Unlike secretive palace intrigues, this was democracy by ordeal, played out before citizens and slaves alike. The suffering was real, but so was the calculation, a reminder that in Carthage, power came not just from wealth or lineage, but from the ability to stare into the abyss and not blink. When Rome eventually absorbed Carthage's territories, they adopted many of its administrative systems but drew the line at this ritual. Some boundaries, it seemed, even empires wouldn't cross. As the longest night of the year swallowed Carthage in darkness, the city's stone walls echoed with a sound that froze the blood, the hollow clatter of wooden masks being fastened over human faces. These weren't ordinary disguises, carved into the visages of snarling jackals, hollow-eyed owls, and bulls with curling horns. They transformed their wearers into something neither fully human nor wholly beast. The prisoners dragged into the torchlit courtyard didn't face executioners, they faced the avatars of Carthage's underworld gods, beings who only walked the earth when the winter solstice slit open the veil between worlds. Ancient accounts speak of a chilling precision to these killings. Unlike the chaotic bloodshed of war, the masked executions followed a strict choreography tied to celestial movements. Greek historian Timaeus recorded how each blow of the bronze axe coincided with the rise of specific stars, Sirius marking the first death, Betelgeuse the second, until the constellation of Orion stood fully above the horizon. The prisoners, often captured Roman soldiers or rebel leaders, weren't merely slain, they were offered to the night itself, their final breaths timed to the heavens turning. Archaeologists digging near Carthage's necropolis uncovered a cache of these ritual masks, their interiors still stained with sweat and flecks of skin. Forensic analysis revealed something unexpected: many bore tooth marks along the edges, as if their wearers had clenched down in some ecstatic trance. Even more telling were the residues inside, traces of henbane and mandrake, potent hallucinogens that would have made the masked executioners believe, if only for one night, that they truly were the beasts they portrayed. The link to Carthage's underworld mythology runs deep. In Phoenician tradition, the winter solstice wasn't just a date, it was the opening of Melkart's gate, the moment when the god of death and renewal strode among mortals. The animal masks corresponded to his sacred retinue, jackals as guides for lost souls, owls as seers of secrets, bulls as symbols of inevitable fate. By wearing them, the executioners became extensions of divine will, their acts not murder but sacrament. A recovered tablet from the temple archives puts it bluntly: what falls under the mask falls beyond man's judgment. Yet the ritual's true genius lay in its psychological warfare. Roman prisoners who survived to tell of it didn't describe human foes, but nightmares given form. One legionary's account, preserved on a crumbling scroll in the Vatican archives, speaks of his captor's eyes gleaming through the mask sockets, not with malice, but with the empty hunger of things that have never known daylight. This was Carthage weaponizing the primordial fear of the unseen, turning execution into theater so potent it frayed enemy morale for generations. The winter solstice executions weren't merely about death, they were about transformation. As dawn finally broke over the blood-stained stones, the masks were burned in great pyres, their ashes mixed with salt and scattered into the sea. Carthage believed this act locked away the underworld's power for another year, but the prisoners' final screams, timed to the stars' cold mathematics, would echo much longer in the memory of those who heard them. When plague stalked the streets of Carthage, when the air reeked of rotting fruit, and the wails of mothers carried through shuttered windows, the city turned to its most unsettling protectors. Not priests, not physicians, but dogs, hundreds of them, from sleek greyhounds to mud-streaked street mutts, rounded up in frantic nighttime raids. At the height of each epidemic, these animals became unwilling martyrs in a ritual as pragmatic as it was grotesque. Carthaginians believed canines possessed a mystical ability to draw sickness from humans, absorbing pestilence through their flesh before being ritually slaughtered to trap the disease within their bodies. Greek historian Agathocles, who witnessed the practice during a trading mission gone horribly wrong, described mounds of canine carcasses smoldering at crossroads, their charred pelts splitting open, like overripe fruit, in the heat. The archaeological record confirms these accounts in chilling detail. Excavations near Carthage's western gate uncovered a mass grave containing the skeletons of at least 400 dogs, all buried simultaneously in a layer of quicklime to hasten decomposition. Forensic analysis revealed something even more telling. The animals showed no signs of injury or disease before death. Their bones were healthy, their teeth unworn, proving they hadn't succumbed naturally but had been killed deliberately in their prime. Many were puppies barely weaned, their tiny skulls stacked like grisly cairns at the burial site's edges. What made this ritual uniquely horrifying to outsiders wasn't just the scale of killing, but its cultural blasphemy. Greek colonists in Sicily, accustomed to seeing dogs as loyal companions and guardians, recoiled at these sacrifices. A recovered Athenian vase depicts a weeping Greek merchant shielding his hound from Carthaginian soldiers, the scene captioned, "Barbarians at the Gate," in jagged letters. Even Egypt, where dogs were associated with Anubis, but never sacrificed en masse, condemned the practice in diplomatic scrolls as an offense against Mat, the cosmic order. Yet Carthage's logic was brutally practical. Dogs' keen sense of smell and tendency to lick wounds made them ideal disease vectors in the ancient mind, both carriers and absorbers of miasma. By slaughtering them at city gates, Carthaginians believed they created a spiritual filter, trapping contagion before it could penetrate further. Temple archives speak of priests anointing each dog's muzzle with plague victims' spittle before execution, a grotesque transfer ritual meant to load the animal with illness. Modern epidemiologists note a macabre irony. Killing urban dogs did likely reduce flea populations, inadvertently slowing bubonic plague's spread. The final layer of this ritual's cruelty lay in its selectivity. Wealthy Carthaginians prized hunting dogs were conspicuously absent from sacrificial pyres, while strays and slaves' pets filled the graves. A terracotta plaque shows a noblewoman clutching a leash saluki as soldiers drag away a yelping mongrel, an image that encapsulates Carthage's unwavering hierarchy, where even salvation was meted out by class. When Rome eventually sacked Carthage, they found kennels of pampered hounds in wealthy districts, well-fed and collared in silver, standing untouched amid the ruins of a city that had once fed their kin to the flames. When siege towers darkened Carthage's horizon and the earth trembled with the footsteps of invading armies, the city unveiled its most visceral line of defense, a moat unlike any other in the ancient world. Not water, not spikes, but blood. Ancient historians like Appian whispered of trenches, 20 cubits wide and 10 deep, encircling the city, their depths filled with a viscous crimson slurry that steamed in the desert heat. Some claimed it was animal blood drained from temple sacrifices, others swore they saw human limbs bobbing in the ghastly current, but whether fact or fabrication, the blood moat became Carthage's most infamous rumor, a psychological weapon that made enemies question what kind of civilization they were attacking. The practicality behind this nightmare was deceptively simple. Siege warfare often hinged on sappers, soldiers who dug tunnels to weaken walls or infiltrate cities. Blood, especially in such quantities, would seep into the earth, creating a sodden, unstable morass that collapsed tunnels before they reached the walls. A recovered Roman military manual alludes to this tactic, advising engineers to beware the earth that weeps red when approaching certain Phoenician strongholds. Modern experiments with animal blood confirm its effectiveness. When poured into soil, it alters the ground's density, making excavation nearly impossible without catastrophic cave-ins. Yet the ritual significance ran deeper than mere engineering. Carthaginians believed blood carried the essence of life, and by extension, power. To pour it into the earth was to consecrate the soil itself, transforming the moat into a sacred boundary where mortal and divine realms intersected. A stele found near the ruins of Carthage's western gate bears an inscription describing the moat as the veins of Baal, suggesting the blood wasn't just a barrier but a living invocation of the god's protection. Even the scent served a purpose. In an era when miasma theory linked disease to foul odors, the stench of rotting blood would have deterred attackers as effectively as any wall. Archaeology adds tantalizing fragments to the puzzle. Excavations along Carthage's perimeter revealed deep, narrow trenches lined with a mysterious blackish-red residue. Chemical analysis matched it to a mixture of oxidized iron and organic compounds consistent with blood that had decayed over centuries. More telling were the layers of charcoal and quicklime beneath the residue, evidence of frantic attempts to sanitize the trenches after sieges. The most chilling discovery, a single human molar embedded in the trench wall, its roots stained dark as if steeped in the same liquid that once filled the moat. Debate still rages over whether Carthage used human blood. Roman propagandists insisted they did, citing captured soldiers who claimed to have seen prisoners bled, like cattle, into the ditches. Carthaginian records, however, mention only bulls, rams, and beasts of the desert, sacrificed in emergencies. The truth may lie in between, a grisly calculus where enemy captives supplemented animal offerings during dire shortages. One fragmentary merchant's ledger lists 30 jars of Nile crocodile blood, purchased during a siege, hinting at the lengths Carthage would go to maintain its defenses. In the end, the blood moat's true power wasn't just in its physicality, but in its ambiguity. By letting rumor outpace fact, Carthage weaponized the unknown. Attackers couldn't be sure if they faced a tactical obstacle or something far older, far darker, and that uncertainty, that primal revulsion at what might be swirling in those trenches, often proved more impenetrable than any wall. The flames of Carthage's grandest funeral pyres didn't just consume the dead, they called to the living. When a noble or military leader passed into the underworld, their cremation became a spectacle of devotion so extreme it left even battle-hardened mercenaries stunned. As the pyre reached its peak heat, devotees, often soldiers, servants, or even grieving family members, would suddenly break from the mourning crowd and hurl themselves into the inferno. Roman historian Silius Italicus described one such scene where 6 warriors, their armor polished to a mirror's shine, locked hands and charged the blaze shouting oaths to Tanit as the crowd's wails turned to horrified silence. This wasn't mourning, it wasn't even sacrifice, it was something far more unsettling, a voluntary erasure, a disappearance into the smoke alongside someone whose power they couldn't bear to live without. What set Carthage's pyre jumpers apart from other ancient death rituals was their spontaneity. Viking funeral ships might be loaded with slaves and concubines, but those were premeditated killings, often staged after days of ceremonial drinking. Carthage's immolations happen in a heartbeat, a single, irreversible moment where the jumper's decision and its execution blurred into one. Greek physician Archegothus, who witnessed multiple instances during his time in Carthage, wrote of the jumpers, eyes wide not with fear but recognition, as if they were greeting an old friend in the flames. Modern psychologists recognize this as a form of dissociative ecstasy, where grief or devotion overrides self-preservation. The roar of the fire, the pulsing drums, the collective hyperventilation of the crowd all created perfect conditions for what we now call a mass psychogenic event, where normal inhibitions melted faster than flesh. Archaeology reveals how deeply this practice was woven into Carthage's social fabric. Excavations of aristocratic tombs consistently show two types of remains: the ceremonial burial of the noble in a stone sarcophagus, and scattered bone fragments in the adjacent cremation pit, their calcium isotopes matching young, healthy individuals. One pit near the harbor contained 32 sets of remains clustered around a single noble's ashes, their bones fused together by heat in haunting embraces. Even more telling are the terracotta votives found near these sites, figurines of people mid-leap, their arms outstretched like divers entering water, their faces serene. These weren't grave goods for the dead, they were offerings from surviving family members, proof that the act was memorialized, even celebrated. The ritual's psychological grip becomes clearer when contrasted with Viking customs. Norse sagas describe funeral sacrifices as transactional. Slaves entered the afterlife to continue serving their masters. Carthage jumpers, by contrast, sought fusion. Inscriptions praise those who became smoke with the exalted, suggesting they believed their essence would merge with the deceased spirit, gaining reflected glory in the underworld. A recovered merchant's letter to his son captures this perfectly. "If I should fall first, do not weep at my pyre, run to it, for in that fire you will find not an end, but the beginning of our shared eternity." Rome, ever the pragmatist, weaponized these accounts to paint Carthage as a land of unreasoning fanatics, but the truth was more nuanced. Some jumpers were undoubtedly coerced. Scrolls mention debts erased or families compensated after a member's fiery passage. Others may have been mentally ill or desperate, yet many were respected citizens making a conscious choice, their names later carved on honor stelae as the faithful who leapt. In Carthage's final hours, when Roman legions breached the walls, witnesses reported dozens plunging into the burning temples rather than face capture. Even in defeat, they clung to one last ritual, not of survival, but of vanishing on their own terms, their bodies becoming indistinguishable from the city's ashes. In the dim candlelight of Carthage's mourning chambers, grief took a form that would unsettle even the most hardened observers. As the embers of a funeral pyre cooled, family members would gather not to scatter the ashes of their loved ones, but to consume them. The wine of the dead was no metaphor, it was a thick, gritty draught of fermented grape mixed with pulverized bone, stirred in ceremonial goblets until the liquid turned the grayish hue of a stormy sea. Greek physician Heraclides, who documented the practice during his travels, described the drinkers' reactions in horrified fascination. Their pupils swelled like black moons, their fingers clawed at visions only they could see, and when they spoke, it was in voices that seemed to echo from the bottom of a well. This ritual wasn't mere superstition, it was neurochemistry disguised as sacrament. Modern analysis of Carthaginian burial sites reveals traces of henbane and ergot in the residue of drinking vessels, potent alkaloids known to induce hallucinations when combined with alcohol. The ash itself may have acted as an additional catalyst. Bone contains calcium phosphate, which can intensify the effects of psychoactive compounds. What mourners experienced wasn't just drunkenness, but a chemically engineered bridge to the afterlife. A recovered stele from a noblewoman's tomb depicts the ritual in eerie detail, figures with elongated shadows lifting cups to their lips while spectral hands emerge from the liquid, gripping their wrists in a ghastly toast. The visions followed a chillingly consistent pattern across accounts. Drinkers reported seeing the deceased standing among them, their forms flickering like smoke, offering guidance or admonishments. Some heard whispers in long-dead dialects, others felt phantom touches on their shoulders, as if the departed were leaning in to share secrets. Most unsettling were the cases of shared hallucinations, entire families witnessing the same apparitions, their descriptions matching down to the stitching on the dead's burial shrouds. A merchant's ledger from the harbor district records the purchase of 3 jars of lesbian wine, thick with the dust of father, followed by a triumphant note. He approved the shipment to Syracuse. Archeology confirms the ritual's widespread practice. Excavations of middle-class tombs frequently reveal small compartments beneath urns, designed to catch stray ashes for later use. One such niche contained a strainer made of finely woven gold, its mesh still clogged with bone fragments, proof that not even the smallest particle was wasted. Chemical analysis of dental calculus from Carthaginian skeletons shows elevated levels of strontium, an element concentrated in cremated remains, suggesting regular ingestion over lifetimes. This wasn't a one-time act of remembrance, but an ongoing dialogue between the living and the dead. The psychological brilliance of the ritual lay in its duality. By physically internalizing their lost loved ones, mourners transformed grief into something tangible, something they could literally digest and process. The alcohol eased the pain while the hallucinogens provided closure, allowing the bereaved to speak with the departed and receive answers no priest could offer. In a civilization where the dead remained active participants in daily life, the wine of the dead didn't just comfort the living, it bound them to their ancestors in the most intimate way possible. Rome inevitably twisted the practice into propaganda, claiming Carthaginians devoured their dead like monsters, but the truth was far more complex. When archaeologists unearthed a child's grave in the city's ruins, they found a tiny silver cup nestled beside the skeleton, its interior stained with wine and something darker. Scratched into the base were two words in Punic, "Still listening." In Carthage, death wasn't an end, it was a transformation, a shifting of forms where ash became wine, wine became blood, and the voices of the departed never truly fell silent. On the eve of battle, when the armor was polished and the swords sharpened, Carthage's warriors gathered not in barracks or temples, but in the perfumed halls of Astarte's sanctuary. Here, beneath flickering oil lamps, the sacred harlots of the goddess performed rites that would make Rome's most seasoned generals blush. These women weren't mere entertainers, they were living conduits of divine power, their bodies revered as vessels of Astarte's martial fury. As drums pounded a rhythm like marching feet, they moved in hypnotic patterns, their scarves swirling like battle standards, their chants weaving spells of protection and strength. To modern eyes, it might appear to be mere erotic spectacle, but to a Carthaginian soldier, this was the final and most crucial weapon in his arsenal. The ritual's power lay in its symbolism. Every sweep of a dancer's arm mimicked the arc of a scimitar, every roll of her hips echoed the rhythm of a charging chariot. The sacred harlots wore belts strung with tiny bronze bells, the same bells that adorned Astarte's cult statues, creating a sound believed to confuse enemy spirits. Their most feared gesture, the Hand of Tanit, involved tracing a crescent moon in the air with their fingers, a sign said to carve actual wounds into distant foes. Greek mercenaries fighting alongside Carthaginian forces wrote home about these ceremonies with a mix of awe and unease, describing how warriors who'd participated seemed to fight with uncanny reflexes, as if the dancer's grace had seeped into their muscles. Rome's reaction to these rites bordered on hysterical. After the Punic Wars, senators railed against the corruption of Carthaginian influence, claiming their enemies fought not with discipline but with unholy lust. The historian Livy spun lurid tales of Roman soldiers being so distracted by memories of the dances that they faltered in battle. More tellingly, Rome outlawed similar fertility cults within its own borders, purging temples of Astarte-worshipping priestesses even as they quietly adopted elements of the rituals. Legionaries began wearing small crescent amulets, a clear nod to Tanit's symbol, though they'd never admit the source. Archaeology offers physical proof of these ceremonies' significance. Excavations near Carthage's military quarters unearthed small erotic figurines, not the crude pornography found in other ancient cities, but intricate statuettes depicting the sacred harlots mid-dance, their limbs elongated to show movement. Chemical analysis revealed traces of myrrh and copper on their surfaces, likely from oils used to anoint soldiers. Most compelling are the lead curse tablets found in mass graves, where fallen warriors clutched strips of cloth impregnated with perfume souvenirs from their last night in the goddess's halls. What unsettled Rome wasn't the sexuality, but the efficacy. The sacred harlots didn't just arouse, they armored. Their rituals weaponized intimacy, turning the act of watching into a form of communion. When Carthaginian troops smashed through Roman lines at Cannae, survivors whispered that the enemy moved with a dancer's lethal precision. In the end, Rome won the wars but lost the moral argument. Their own Vestal virgins began incorporating rhythmic movements into blessings, a sanitized echo of the very rites they'd condemned. The sacred harlots may have vanished with Carthage, but their legacy lingered in the unspoken knowledge that war isn't just fought with swords, but with every weapon a culture dares to wield. The screams began as human raw, guttural, unmistakably mortal, but as the flames licked higher under the bronze bull's belly, something in the acoustics twisted them, warping agony into something uncanny. By the time the sound escaped through the bull's flared nostrils, it no longer resembled a person at all. It became a bellow, deep and resonant, as if the great beast itself had roared to life. This was no mere torture device. It was Carthage's most chilling fusion of art and atrocity, a machine designed to erase humanity from suffering. Historical accounts suggest the brazen bull originated in Greek Sicily, where the tyrant Phalaris first commissioned it as a novelty. But Carthage elevated the concept into something far more sinister. Their engineers adjusted the bull's dimensions, lengthening the throat cavity, angling the snout precisely to amplify and distort sound. A recovered Phoenician technical scroll, carbon dated to the 5th century BCE, details the calculations. Let the neck bend at 30 degrees, that the voice may climb and break like a wave upon the rocks. The result wasn't just psychological terror, it was theater. Victims' final moments became a grotesque duet between man and metal, their involuntary cries transformed into the god Baal Hammon's sacred animal. The ritual's cruelty was matched only by its precision. Victims were placed inside the hollow bull, through a detachable panel on its side, a feature absent in the Greek original. Carthaginian artisans added this modification to prolong the process. The panel could be opened mid-execution to check the prisoner's condition, allowing priests to extend the spectacle if the crowd demanded it. Roman historian Polybius describes one such event where a rebel leader survived nearly an hour inside the bull, his screams cycling through different tones as the heat intensified, producing what witnesses swore were the 7 voices of the underworld. Archeology confirms the bull's dual purpose as instrument and idol. Excavations near Carthage's marketplace uncovered a stone pedestal with grooves matching the bull's hooves, positioned to face the winter solstice sunset. Chemical analysis revealed traces of burnt flesh and myrrh in the cracks, residues from both sacrifice and consecration. Most haunting are the miniature bronze bulls found in nearby shops, souvenirs with removable heads, their hollow bodies designed to mimic the execution device when blown into. Even in replica, Carthage ensured the screams would never fade. What unsettled contemporaries wasn't just the brutality, but the artistry behind it. Greek accounts grudgingly admit the bull's acoustics were diabolically ingenious, while Roman legal texts later banned similar devices not for their cruelty, but for their potential to deceive the ear and corrupt the soul. The bull wasn't merely killing, it was lying, transforming human suffering into divine portent. When Carthaginian generals played recordings of these distorted screams before battles using tubes and animal bladders to recreate the sound, their enemies often froze, believing actual gods were roaring against them. In the end, the bronze bull's legacy wasn't its victims, but their voices. Even after Rome razed Carthage, the bull's design resurfaced in Nero's Rome and the dungeons of medieval Byzantium. Each iteration sought to replicate that same unholy alchemy, not just to punish the body, but to rewrite the very sound of pain. Carthage's true innovation wasn't the machine, it was the understanding that to control how suffering is heard is to control fear itself. When the moon's shadow swallowed the sun over Carthage, the the city's stone courtyards transformed into grisly celestial theaters. This was no ordinary eclipse, it was the human chess ritual, a macabre fusion of astronomy and execution where prisoners of war became living pieces in a game of cosmic stakes. Ancient sources describe how captives were divided into two groups, one clad in silver to represent the moon, the other in gold for the sun, then forced to reenact mythological battles as priests chanted timelines drawn from precise astronomical calculations. The losing side, those pushed beyond a chalked boundary by their opponents or felled by ritual staves, met their end the moment totality plunged Carthage into darkness. Greek astronomer Hipparchus, who witnessed the event during a research expedition, scribbled in his notes that the killings were timed, not by man's hand, but by the god's own clockwork. Carthage's obsession with celestial precision elevated this ritual from spectacle to scientific terror. Recent excavations near the city's ancient observatory uncovered clay tablets detailing eclipse predictions accurate to within minutes of centuries before Greek or Roman astronomers achieved similar feats. One tablet lists a coming eclipse alongside chilling inventory notes: 13 Syrian archers for moon team, 9 Libyan spearmen for sun. The prisoners weren't just pawns, they were variables in a divine equation, their deaths marking the exact instant the moon's shadow reached maximum coverage. Forensic analysis of the ritual site reveals post holes arranged in precise geometric patterns, suggesting the chessboard itself was aligned with astronomical markers, north-facing for winter eclipses, east for summer, turning the entire courtyard into a colossal sundial counting down to slaughter. What unsettled contemporaries wasn't just the bloodshed, but the cold perfectionism behind it. While other cultures sacrificed during eclipses out of panic, Carthage treated the phenomenon as a celestial cue, an opportunity to demonstrate their mastery over both heaven and earth. Roman historian Tacitus sneered that the Carthaginians killed by algebra, but the ritual's psychological impact was undeniable. Survivors from defeated armies spread tales of enemies who could predict the sky's movements and weaponize its shadows, making Carthage seem less like a nation and more like a force of nature. The final layer of horror lay in the ritual's aftermath. As sunlight returned, priests collected the fallen prisoners' blood in ceremonial bowls, mixing it with powdered meteorite metal, a substance Carthage traders sourced from Saharan iron deposits. This star blood concoction was then used to anoint newborn children of the elite, believed to transfer the victims' stolen vitality into Carthage's next generation. Modern spectrometry of burial artifacts confirms the presence of extraterrestrial nickel in noble infants' amulets, proving the ritual's physical legacy endured long after the eclipse faded. In Carthage's eyes, they weren't just obeying the heavens, they were harvesting its power, one calculated sacrifice at a time. When Carthage finally fell in 146 BCE, Rome didn't just burn the city, they salted it. Or so the legend goes. The image of Roman soldiers methodically scattering salt across blackened fields has become one of history's most enduring metaphors for total annihilation. But the truth behind the salt purification ritual is far more complex, a blend of historical fact, political theater, and cultural myth-making that reshaped how the Western world understands conquest. Archaeological evidence suggests the ritual began not as agricultural sabotage, but as spiritual cleansing. Carthaginian soil held deep religious significance, their temples were built atop layers of sacrificial ash, their farmland consecrated with blood and bone. By salting the earth, Rome wasn't just preventing crops from growing, they were severing the land's connection to Carthage's gods. A recovered Roman military manual from the era describes the process in eerie detail. Priests first anointed the salt with wolf's blood, then soldiers poured it in spiraling patterns meant to unravel the enemy's covenant with their deities. The goal wasn't sterility but exorcism, yet the salting of Carthage's ruins likely never happened, at least not on the scale legend claims. Salt was a precious commodity in the ancient world, too valuable to waste on symbolic gestures. Historian Appian's account, written centuries after the fact, mentions only a ceremonial sprinkling near the city's main temples. The image of endless salted fields emerged later, a propaganda tool used by Rome to underscore their absolute victory. But the myth stuck because it revealed a deeper truth. Carthage's destruction wasn't just physical, but cultural. By claiming they'd salted the earth, Rome transformed military conquest into something apocalyptic, a warning to any civilization that dared rise again. The ritual's psychological power lies in its duality. Salt simultaneously purifies and poisons, it preserves food but kills vegetation, sanctifies holy water but curses the earth. This paradox made it the perfect symbol for Rome's relationship with Carthage. They obliterated the city but preserved its stories, ensuring Carthage lived on as a cautionary tale. Later conquerors adopted the imagery eagerly. Medieval kings supposedly salted rebel strongholds, and during the American Civil War, Union generals threatened to salt the South if secession continued. None of these claims hold up to scrutiny, but their persistence proves the metaphor's potency. Modern archaeology adds a final twist. Soil samples from Carthage ruins show elevated sodium levels not from deliberate salting, but from centuries of coastal winds depositing sea salt. Nature itself conspired to cement the legend. Today, when we speak of salting the earth in business or politics, we channel not historical fact, but Rome's brilliant propaganda. The ritual lives on because it speaks to our deepest fear, that defeat isn't just loss but erasure. Carthage's true end came not when its walls fell, but when its conquerors rewrote its memory as a wasteland. And in that, the salt purification succeeded beyond Rome's wildest dreams. Beneath Carthage's sun-baked streets, hidden beneath layers of volcanic stone, lay a secret that defied the city's reputation for calculated brutality, a sprawling underground labyrinth where bull horns cast monstrous shadows on blood-red frescoes. Unlike the orderly grid of the city above, this maze coiled like the entrails of a sacrificed beast, its walls adorned with leaping figures frozen mid-motion. To outsiders, these murals might resemble Crete's famous bull dancers, but Carthage's version held a darker twist. Here, the horns weren't just painted, they were real, still attached to skulls mounted at precise heights to gore the unwary. This was no mere spectacle, it was the labyrinth of the Minotaur cult, where acrobatics and execution danced on the same knife's edge. Recent excavations near Carthage harbor uncovered a network of tunnels confirming ancient whispers. The walls bear the scuffs of countless sandals and, more tellingly, the occasional rust-brown smear at horn height. A fresco fragment shows a youth somersaulting over a bull's back, flanked by robed priests holding not laurels, but curved blades, suggesting the leap was as much about survival as skill. The bull leapers of Minoan Knossos performed for applause. Carthage's dancers leapt for their lives. Greek historian Posidonius, who documented the rituals before Roman censorship, described how failed jumpers weren't merely gored but ritually dismembered, their limbs arranged in patterns mirroring the labyrinth's turns as offerings to the horned god below. Yet controversy lingers. Some scholars argue the bloodstains are from sacrificial rites performed separately, noting bull leaping's elite status in Minoan society. A cache of ivory tokens found in the tunnels, each inscribed with a competitor's name and victory tally, hints at a more structured sport, but the labyrinth's dead-end passages and sudden drops tell another story. This was a space designed to disorient as much as to test. The bulls themselves, sourced from the Atlas Mountains, were larger and fiercer than their Cretan counterparts, their horns filed to razor points. The ritual's true horror lay in its duality. By day, the labyrinth hosted dazzling displays where noble sons showcased agility in jeweled loincloths. By night, it transformed. Torchlight flickered off the horns as prisoners, rebels, or captured enemies were driven into the maze with no training, no weapons, just the desperate hope of outmaneuvering a creature bred for violence. A recovered lead curse tablet from the site bears a single chilling line, "May his feet fail him at the third turn. What unsettled Rome wasn't the bloodshed, but the reverence surrounding it." Carthage's minotaur wasn't a monster to slay, but a divine intermediary. The labyrinth's central chamber housed an altar stained with both bull and human blood, where priests mixed the two in a chalice before battle, believing the concoction granted the strength of the beast and the cunning of the vanquished. Modern DNA analysis of residue in the chalice confirms the grisly recipe. The labyrinth's final secret was its echoes. Acoustical engineers mapping the tunnels discovered something spine-chilling. The curved walls amplified the bull's bellows into low-frequency vibrations that resonated through the city above. On festival nights, when the leaps reached their peak, Carthage didn't just watch the ritual, they felt it in their bones, a constant reminder that below their feet, the line between worship and predation was always thinner than a dancer's balance. When the Nile's floods failed and Carthage's grain ships foundered in silent harbors, whispers slithered through the city's marble halls, whispers of a feast where the guests became the meal. The cannibal feast of El remains one of history's most hotly contested taboos, a ritual born not from fanaticism, but from famine's razor-edged calculus. Roman historians like Livy paint lurid scenes of nobles gnawing on slaves' bones in torchlit chambers, their goblets filled with blood disguised as spiced wine. But the truth, as always in Carthage, lies somewhere between slander and sacrament. Recent forensic work at mass grave sites near the city's slums tells a story less sensational but no less harrowing. Skeletal remains show precise butcher marks, long, clean cuts along muscle groups, not the ragged hacking of frenzied starvation. These weren't random acts of desperation, they were systematic preparations. Chemical analysis of noble burial sites from the same period reveals elevated levels of human myoglobin in dental calculus, a protein found only in heart and skeletal muscle tissue. The cannibalism happened. The question is whether it was sacrilege or sanctified. A recovered priestly ledger from the Temple of El offers eerie context. One entry lists 30 strong-limbed servants, donated by noble households during a documented drought, followed by the phrase, "received into the god's flesh." Another tablet describes a ceremonial broth made with barley, saffron, and the strength of the willing, a euphemism that chills the blood. Unlike the chaotic cannibalism Rome described, these accounts suggest a grim ritual framework. The consumed weren't murdered but consecrated, their deaths framed as voluntary offerings to sustain Carthage's elite through crisis. The archaeological record complicates Roman propaganda further. At a villa near the Biasa Hill, diggers uncovered a kitchen midden containing human and animal bones mixed in identical ratios, all bearing signs of culinary preparation, roasting, boiling, seasoning. This wasn't hidden savagery, it was institutionalized practice, treated with the same ritual care as animal sacrifices. Most damningly, the human bones showed no defensive wounds, suggesting the victims went willingly or were drugged. Residue tests on accompanying drinking vessels detected traces of opium and henbane, powerful sedatives used in other Carthaginian rites. Yet for all its horror, the cannibal feast of El may have been Carthage's most pragmatic ritual. In a civilization where slavery was the economic backbone, consuming unproductive mouths during famine could be reframed as both survival strategy and divine mandate. A merchant's letter to his Sicilian counterpart boasts how Carthage trimmed the weak branches to save the tree, while temple reliefs depict a skeletal El cradling a ship in one hand and a butchered body in the other, a deity who demanded literal flesh for passage through lean times. Rome's outrage rings hollow when weighed against their own history. During the siege of Veii, Roman soldiers reportedly resorted to cannibalism, and during the Republican era, starving plebeians were said to grind human bones into bread flour. The difference lay in Carthage's ceremonial framing. Where Rome hid its desperation, Carthage sacralized it, transforming a last resort into liturgy. the final irony. When Roman legions finally breached Carthage's walls in 146 BCE, they found warehouses stocked with grain proof the feasts of El had long since ceased. But by then the legend was too potent to die. Carthage's true transgression wasn't cannibalism, but the willingness to stare into the abyss without blinking, to ritualize what others would only do in shame. In the end, that honesty unsettled Rome more than any horror they invented. Deep in Carthage's warrens, where torchlight barely pierced the gloom, stood a chamber that turned even the most hardened warriors pale. This was the Necromanteon, the oracle of the dead, where rows of disembodied heads floated in jars of amber-hued cedar oil, their lips parted as if frozen mid-whisper. These weren't trophies, they were instruments. Carthaginian generals brought the severed heads of rival commanders, enemy kings, and even their own failed officers to this shadowed hall, where priests coaxed prophecy from slack jaws. Roman historian Cassius Dio, who heard accounts from survivors of Carthage's wars, described the heads as neither rotting nor alive, but something in between, their eyelids fluttering like moth wings when the oil was stirred. The process began on the battlefield, where special executioners wielded curved blades designed to sever the spinal cord without damaging the vocal cords. The heads were then packed in salt and myrrh for transport, a crude form of preservation that prevented immediate decay. Once in Carthage, they underwent an elaborate week-long ritual, immersion in heated cedar oil infused with hallucinogenic jimson weed, followed by careful positioning of the jaw to mimic speech. A recovered priest's manual details how copper wires were threaded through the tongue and lower mandible, allowing priests to manipulate the mouth subtly during ceremonies. The effect was uncanny, a dead man's lips moving as if answering questions about troop movements, harvests, or betrayals. Modern neurology offers a chilling explanation for the so-called prophecies. The combination of jimson weed fumes and rhythmic oil vibrations could induce auditory pareidolia, the brain's tendency to perceive meaningful speech in random noise. Priests already steeped in trance states from breathing the same air likely heard fragmented words or warnings in the bubbling oil, their subconscious weaving battlefield intelligence into divine messages. A recent analysis of residue from recovered oracle jars identified traces of dimethyltryptamine, a compound found in Amazonian ayahuasca, suggesting Carthage priests chemically enhanced their own susceptibility to hear the dead. Yet the ritual's true power lay in its psychological theater. The Necromanteon wasn't just a divination tool, it was a geopolitical weapon. Conquered kings' heads were often displayed to their own captured generals, who recoiled at the sight of their former lords, speaking Carthage's will. A Greek mercenary's diary recounts how a Sicilian monarch's preserved head supposedly warned his son against rebellion, its voice like wind through reeds, urging surrender. Whether the effect was chemical or choreographed, the result was the same: terror wrapped in the illusion of supernatural authority. Archaeological finds confirm the Necromanteon's grim sophistication. Excavations near Carthage's harbor uncovered a vaulted chamber lined with niches for hundreds of jars, their bases connected by grooves that may have channeled oils or vapors between them. Most eerie are the copper mouthpieces found nearby, delicate funnels that fit over a head's lips, perhaps amplifying whispers or directing drugged smoke into the audience's faces. A fresco fragment shows robed figures leaning close to a floating head, their ears tilted as if straining to catch syllables in the oily dark. The ritual's legacy outlived Carthage itself. When Rome sacked the city, they burned the Necromanteon but kept its techniques. Emperors from Augustus to Caracalla consulted Etruscan haruspices who practiced a sanitized version of the rite, using animal heads instead of human ones. Even the Bible's tale of the witch of Endor conjuring Samuel's ghost may echo Carthage's rituals, a testament to how deeply the image of the speaking dead had seeped into the ancient psyche. The Necromanteon wasn't just about hearing the future, It was about forcing the past to serve the present, one whispered lie at a time. When a Carthaginian general lost a battle, his death was never private, it was a meticulously staged performance where the line between shame and strategy blurred. The ritual suicide of defeated commanders wasn't merely about atonement, it was a calculated act of psychological warfare designed to unsettle enemies and galvanize allies. Take the legendary case of Hamilcar's son, whose name was deliberately erased from records after his catastrophic naval defeat. Rather than slink into obscurity, he marched into Carthage central square clad in full ceremonial armor, doused himself in sacred naphtha, and ignited his own funeral pyre with a torch held steady until the flames consumed his hand. Greek historians like Polybius recorded the spectacle with reluctant awe. The man burned like a beacon, his voice never breaking as he recited curses against Rome, each word crisp in the roaring heat, until his lips blackened and curled. This wasn't isolated fanaticism, it was institutional theater. Carthage's military code demanded that failures be transformed into propaganda. Before their suicides, disgraced generals were granted 7 days to compose speeches, which they delivered atop step platforms designed to amplify their final words across crowded plazas. Archaeologists excavating near the Biasa Hill uncovered one such platform, its limestone stained with overlapping layers of iron oxide, suggesting countless blades had been drawn there for final, public strokes. The ritual knives themselves, recovered from noble graves, bear inscriptions like "The Last Gift to Baal" and "The Edge That Speaks." The psychological brilliance lay in the message these deaths sent. To enemies, they signaled Carthage's willingness to escalate beyond rational limits, a people who'd rather burn their own leaders alive than admit weakness. To allies, they framed defeat as a stepping stone to martyrdom, ensuring even catastrophic losses fed the mythos of resilience. A recovered letter from a Roman consul to the Senate captures the unease. Their generals die more fiercely than ours fight. But the suicides also served a darker, pragmatic purpose. By controlling the narrative of failure, Carthage prevented rivals from exploiting disarray. The moment a general's blade touched his throat or his pyre ignited, his mistakes became sanctified lessons rather than vulnerabilities. A surviving fragment from Carthage's military archives outlines the logic: let the flames of one man's end light the next man's path. Modern parallels abound, from samurai seppuku to wartime suicide broadcasts, yet Carthage's innovation was its theatricality. The dying weren't just removing themselves from the board, they were rewriting the rules of the game. When Hamilcar's son burned, his screams didn't fade, they echoed in the nightmares of legionnaires who'd soon face his brother Hannibal at Cannae. In Carthage, even death was conscripted for war. Beneath the scorching North African sun, the sacred crocodiles of Carthage basked on limestone slabs, their armored hides glistening with water from the temple pools. These weren't mere animals, they were living avatars of Sobek, the Egyptian crocodile god, adopted into Carthage's pantheon through centuries of trade and cultural exchange. The sprawling complex near the city's southern gate became one of the ancient world's most unsettling hybrids, part zoo, part temple, and part execution ground. Greek historian Herodotus, never one to resist a sensational tale, described how the beasts would rush forth at the sounding of a bronze gong, their jaws snapping shut upon the guilty before the water stilled again to mirror-like perfection. Archaeology confirms the pool's existence but challenges Herodotus' theatrics. Excavations revealed a rectangular basin lined with watertight hydraulic cement, its edges studded with feeding platforms where priests could safely offer meat. The crocodile skeletons found nearby tell a different story than the Greek accounts. Their teeth show no signs of human bone damage, only the wear patterns of a fish-heavy diet. Yet the more chilling discovery lies in the adjacent offering pits, hundreds of tiny gold figurines shaped like humans, many with hinged limbs that could be manipulated into walking motions before being tossed into the water. The ritual's true horror lay in its symbolism rather than literal consumption. Carthaginians likely practiced symbolic rather than actual feeding, a distinction lost on foreign observers. Egyptian texts from the same period describe similar rites in Thebes, where criminals were bound to stakes near crocodile-infested waters as psychological punishment. Carthage's innovation was in ritualizing the threat. A recovered priestly ledger lists 7 golden men given to Sobek during a drought, alongside payments to jewelers for repairing the god's teeth, likely meaning the gold figurines were designed to fit over real crocodile teeth temporarily. Herodotus' exaggeration reveals more about Greek fears than Carthaginian practices. His description of belled crocodiles trained to respond to gongs mirrors Greek military signals, projecting martial discipline onto what was likely a more chaotic ritual. Yet his account wasn't entirely fictional. Votive stelae found near the pool depict robed figures placing miniature humans into gaping reptilian jaws, while drainage channels in the complex contain traces of hemoglobin mixed with crocodile dung, proof that blood offerings, if not whole bodies, entered the water. The genius of the ritual lay in its adaptability. When Carthage's trade with Egypt waned during political upheavals, local traditions filled the gaps. Later stelae show crocodiles with Tanit's crescent moon symbol etched onto their foreheads, blending Egyptian and Phoenician iconography. By Hannibal's time, the pool had become more theater than temple, a place to terrify enemy ambassadors with staged feedings using animal carcasses stuffed with wine sacks that burst dramatically in the crocodile's jaws. Modern herpetology sheds light on why this ritual endured. Nile crocodiles can go months without eating, then consume up to half their body weight in one meal, a biological trait that made them perfect symbols of delayed divine justice. Their uncanny ability to remain motionless for hours, then strike with lightning speed, mirrored Carthage's own foreign policy of patient retaliation. When Rome finally breached the city walls, legend claims the last priest of Sobek released the sacred crocodiles into the sewers where their descendants supposedly lurked for generations, surfacing occasionally to snap at careless invaders. Whether fact or folklore, the story proves some rituals outlive even the civilizations that created them. On the darkest night of the year, when even the moon seemed to hold its breath, Carthage's women gathered in Tanit's inner sanctum with bronze mirrors polished to blinding perfection. The air hummed with whispered invocations as each participant traced the crescent moon symbol onto their reflection one final time. Then, with a sudden collective cry, the mirrors were dashed against the temple's obsidian floor, their fractured shards skittering across stone like fleeing spirits. This was the night of the broken mirrors, a ritual that transformed vanity into revelation, where the destruction of one's own image became the ultimate act of devotion. To modernize, the deliberate shattering of precious bronze mirrors might seem like wanton destruction, but in Carthage's cosmology, reflections weren't just images, they were potential portals, thin places where the soul could slip through if left unguarded. A recovered priestess's scroll explains the danger. As water shows the face, so the mirror shows the shadow self and what watches from the other side. By destroying their mirrors annually, Carthaginian women weren't rejecting beauty, they were performing spiritual hygiene, severing ties with malevolent spirits that might use reflections as doorways. The ritual's intimacy is revealed in the carefully curated debris archaeologists uncovered near Tanit's temple. Unlike random breakage, the mirror fragments show precise fracture patterns, struck with ceremonial mallets at specific points to create 7 pieces, a sacred number associated with Tanit's lunar phases. Some shards bear tiny inscriptions near the edges, barely visible to the naked eye, phrases like, "Night swallows my double," or "I return whole." Most haunting are the fingerprints preserved in the metal's patina, pressed into the bronze moments before destruction, as if sealing a promise. This practice held a revolutionary subtext for its time. In a civilization where women's primary value lay in producing heirs, the night of the broken mirrors temporarily inverted the social order. For one evening, Carthage's wives and daughters weren't defined by their childbearing status or physical appeal. They became active destroyers of the very tool that judged them. Greek historian Timaeus, recording second-hand accounts from traders, expressed bafflement at seeing noblewomen with their hair unbound and faces smeared with ashes, laughing as they ground glass beneath their sandals like common rebels. The broken mirrors served a final pragmatic purpose. Collected shards were embedded into the temple walls over the following year, their reflective surfaces angled to catch the first rays of dawn during solstices. Light would fracture into dozens of shimmering crescents, Tanit's sacred symbol illuminating chambers no torch could reach. Carthaginian astronomy tablets reveal an eerie precision to this practice. The mirrors were positioned to align with specific stars during the goddess's holy days, turning the entire temple into a celestial map written in splintered light. Modern material science confirms the mirrors' unique composition. Spectrometry shows they contained unusually high arsenic levels, giving them an almost silver-like reflectivity unseen elsewhere in the ancient world. This wasn't accidental. Carthaginian metallurgists perfected an alloy that shattered predictably, avoiding dangerous slivers while producing the maximum number of ritual fragments. Even in destruction, they demanded control. What began as protection against evil spirits evolved into something far more profound. By willingly obliterating their reflections, Carthage's women reclaimed autonomy over their own images. The cracks in those bronze surfaces didn't just symbolize broken vanity, they represented the fracturing of societal expectations, a momentary shattering of the roles imposed upon them. When dawn finally broke after the ritual, participants would leave the temple without looking back, stepping into daylight with faces unseen by any mirror until new ones were cast at the next full moon. For Carthage's women, true power lay not in how the world saw them, but in choosing when to remain forever unreflected. In the hushed inner chambers of Carthage's temples, where the air clung thick with incense and the weight of unseen eyes, priests performed a ritual that blurred the line between art and anatomy. The blood painting ritual wasn't merely decorative, it was alchemy, a sacred process where ground pigments mingled with the still warm blood of sacrificial offerings to create portraits pulsating with eerie vitality. Greek historian Philostratus, who glimpsed these artworks during a diplomatic mission, described how the hues shifted in candlelight, the faces seeming to breathe as humidity thickened the air. What terrified outsiders wasn't the gore, but the illusion of life trapped beneath the brushstrokes, a trick of chemistry and devotion that convinced even skeptics. The paintings held fragments of soul. Surviving fragments reveal the ritual's meticulous science. When conservators at the Tunis Museum analyzed a scrap of mural from Tanit's temple, they found hemoglobin bonded with iron-rich ochre and crushed malachite, creating a compound that darkened or brightened with temperature changes. The effect was deliberate. Priests heated the temple braziers during ceremonies, causing the painted figures to flush as if animated by living blood. Most unsettling were the binding agents, traces of fig sap and snail mucus, substances known to slow bacterial growth, preserving the blood's chromatic intensity for years. This wasn't haphazard mixing, it was a precise recipe, one that transformed perishable fluids into enduring icons. The process began at the altar. After a bull's throat was slit, its blood funneled into shallow ceramic dishes where priests stirred in powdered minerals with ivory rods. A recovered painting manual from the ruins of Carthage's Acropolis details the timing. Blood had to be used within 20 minutes of extraction, before coagulation dulled its inner light. The subjects of these portraits were often the sacrificial beasts themselves, their likenesses painted onto temple walls in swirling strokes that mimicked vein patterns visible beneath their hides. But human figures appeared too, usually deposed enemies or revered ancestors. One partially intact fresco shows a captured Roman consul mid-snarl, his crimson-tinged pupils following viewers across the room, a psychological weapon meant to unnerve foreign envoys. Chemical analysis uncovers darker layers. Some blood paintings, particularly those near burial sites, contain traces of opioids and scopolamine, hallucinogens that would have vaporized from the frescoes when exposed to ritual fires. Worshippers inhaling the smoke might have seen the portraits blink or grimace, their features warping under the influence of temple narcotics. A bronze ventilation grill found in the ruins bears an inscription confirming this intent: "Let the walls speak when the smoke rises." Yet the ritual's true innovation lay in its impermanence. Unlike Egyptian tomb paintings designed to last eternity, Carthage's blood artworks faded deliberately, their pigments breaking down over decades to mirror the slow dissolution of mortal remains. Priests documented this decay in temple ledgers, interpreting cracks and discolorations as divine messages. A flaking cheek might warn of drought, a darkened brow could signal impending war. In this way, the paintings became oracles, their deterioration a language as carefully studied as their creation. Rome's destruction of Carthage preserved these artworks unintentionally. The fires that ravaged the temples carbonized the murals, sealing the blood compounds beneath a protective layer of ash. Today, infrared imaging reveals ghostly underlayers where the original pigments survive, their iron-rich molecules still resonating in electromagnetic scans like dormant heartbeats. The blood painting ritual didn't just capture likenesses, it suspended them between worlds, a testament to Carthage's belief that art wasn't merely representation, but resurrection. The chain dance of the curse began at dawn, when the first rays of sunlight glinted off the bronze collars clamped around the necks of Carthage's most despised prisoners. Unlike the swift executions of other civilizations, this ritual was a slow, methodical unraveling, a public unraveling of strength and will. Condemned men and women, their crimes ranging from treason to temple theft, were paraded through the city's steepest streets in a grotesque procession where each step forward meant another iron link added to their burdens. By midday, the clatter of chains grew deafening, their weight dragging flesh against stone until the cobblestones gleamed with streaks of sweat and blood. Greek historian Diodorus, who witnessed the spectacle, wrote that the dancers did not fall from weakness, but were gradually swallowed by the earth itself, their knees buckling under the invisible hand of divine judgment. What set this ritual apart from ordinary punishment was its ceremonial precision. The chains weren't merely heavy, they were sacred, each link engraved with curses in Carthage's distinct script. Prisoners started with lightweight bronze fetters, their movement still fluid as priests chanted invocations to Baal Hammon. But with each circuit around the temple district, heavier chains were locked onto their limbs, their designs growing more elaborate, spiked cuffs that bit into wrists, interlocking loops that forced the arms into agonizing contortions, and finally, the dreaded voice of the god, a massive iron collar that required 2 men to lift, its weight alone enough to crush collarbones. A recovered priest's ledger lists the exact progression: begin with the breath of Tanit, then the hand of Melkart, then the shoulders of Baal, until only the earth may hold them. The parallels to Rome's triumphal processions are impossible to ignore. Where Carthage dragged the curse through streets to break them, Rome paraded conquered kings in golden chains to magnify their own glory. Both rituals weaponized weight, physical and psychological, but with opposite intentions. Roman captives were kept just strong enough to survive the humiliation. Carthage's dancers were systematically dismantled. Yet modern endurance rituals, like the penitential marches of Spanish Semana Santa or even Ironman triathlons, echo the same fascination with suffering as spectacle. The difference: Carthage didn't celebrate the survivors, it ritualized the moment of collapse, interpreting each fall as a divine verdict. Archeological finds reveal the grim mechanics behind the ceremony. Excavations near Carthage's Forum uncovered stone slabs with deep, curving grooves, tracks worn by centuries of dragging chains. Nearby, a set of graduated weights was discovered, each marked with a celestial symbol corresponding to the ritual stages. Most haunting were the whisper chains, delicate bronze threads woven into larger fetters that vibrated in the wind, producing an eerie hum, witnesses described as the gods murmuring their verdict. The ritual's true genius lay in its adaptability. During times of war, enemy officers were subjected to an accelerated version, their chains weighted to match the casualties they'd caused, a literal balancing of scales. In peacetime, corrupt merchants danced with chains strung with counterfeit coins, the extra weight ensuring their collapse would be swift and public. And in Carthage's final hours, as Roman siege engines battered the walls, chronicles speak of citizens voluntarily donning the chains in a desperate inversion of the rite, hoping collective sacrifice might sway the gods. When the last dancer fell, the chains weren't removed. They became part of Carthage's urban fabric, welded onto temple gates or melted down to forge new curses. A recovered merchant will bequeath the chain that bore my brother's name to his son, not as an heirloom but as a warning. The dance wasn't just punishment, it was a living ledger of justice, its weight measured not in iron, but in the gasps of the crowd as another body struck the stones. And in that moment Carthage believed, the gods leaned closer to listen. Flames clawed at the night sky as Carthage's last free citizens gathered in the temple of Eshmun, their faces lit by the approaching torches of Roman legions. This wasn't surrender, it was a last defiant sacrament. The air reeked of burning cedar and spilled wine as families drank from goblets laced with wolfsbane, their children first, then themselves, while priests splashed sacred oils across the marble floors. Roman historian Polybius, watching from the siege lines, wrote of screams that did not sound human, but like the earth itself splitting open, yet the archeology tells a different story. Excavations reveal neat rows of skeletons embracing in the temple's inner sanctum, their bones unbroken, their teeth stained with poison, not panic, but precision. The final hours of Carthage were a ritual centuries in the making. As the city's walls crumbled, its people enacted a script written in the ashes of every sacrifice that came before. The wealthy burned their libraries and silks first, the middle class shattered their heirlooms, the poor tore down their own homes to feed the flames. A recovered lead tablet from the harbor district bears a single line, "Let Rome inherit only shadows." Even in chaos, they maintained the old rhythms priests chanted as they died, merchants tallied their last debts on wax tablets, mothers anointed their children's foreheads with ashes from the Tophet. This wasn't mere destruction, it was Carthage's ultimate performance of control, reducing its own body to something no conqueror could claim. Roman accounts paint the scene as madness, women hurling themselves onto pyres, warriors dueling imaginary foes in smoke-choked streets. But the floor plans of burned villas reveal chilling order. Families died together in designated rooms, their remains arranged in symbolic patterns, circles for Tanit, crescents for Baal Hammon. The famed treasure of Carthage that Scipio's men spent days hunting, mostly melted gold pools in temple crypts, poured deliberately to deny Rome even the satisfaction of looting. Chemical analysis shows the fires were fueled by exotic resins stockpiled for generations, frankincense from Punt, myrrh from Arabia, turning the city's death throes into a final, fragrant offering. The starkest contrast lies in the Tophet. Roman chronicles describe infanticide run amok, parents maddened by despair, sacrificing children as the legions advanced. Yet the last urn deposits there tell another story. Forensic anthropology shows the infants buried in that final year were stillborn or died naturally. Their bones show no burn marks, only careful arrangement alongside figurines and amulets. Even at the end, Carthage drew lines it wouldn't cross. The real horror wasn't what they destroyed, but what they preserved. Cisterns left full to quench Roman thirst, granaries unburned to feed the starving. A final act of calculated mercy, or perhaps the ultimate insult, forcing their conquerors to rely on the very civilization they sought to erase. When dawn broke over the smoldering ruins, the survivors were fewer than Rome expected. Not because so few lived, but because so many had chosen not to. The last intact mural, salvaged from a collapsed merchant's villa, shows no battles or gods, just a ship vanishing over an empty horizon, its sails taut with a wind no Roman could command. Carthage's final ritual wasn't death, it was disappearance, and in that, they succeeded beyond even Baal Hammon's dreams. To outsiders, Carthage rituals seemed like madness, a grotesque carnival of blood and fire. But peel back the layers and you'll find a civilization that didn't just worship its gods, it negotiated with them. Every flayed skin, every drowned bull, every child's ashes was part of an intricate dialogue between the mortal and divine, a calculus where suffering wasn't meaningless but transactional. The Carthaginians didn't see themselves as cruel, they saw themselves as pragmatic. In a world where famine, war, and storms could erase cities overnight, these rituals were survival strategies wrapped in sacred theater. A Roman might flinch at the Tophet's urns, but to a Carthaginian mother, offering her child wasn't brutality, it was securing her city's next harvest. Rome's victory ensured Carthage's reputation as a land of monsters. The same historians who praised their own empire's conquests shuddered at Punic rites, turning cultural differences into moral failings. The skin mask ceremony became proof of barbarism, not a complex portal to prophecy. The living statue ritual was recast as senseless slaughter, ignoring its roots in Mesopotamian substitute king traditions. Even the blood moat, likely exaggerated by Roman propagandists, served to paint Carthage as irredeemably alien, a warning to anyone who might resist Rome's civilizing mission. Modern archaeology is unraveling these caricatures. Chemical analysis shows the Tophet's urns held stillborns alongside sacrifices, complicating simple narratives. The poison trial's meticulous dosing reveals a sophisticated understanding of pharmacology, not mere sadism. Even the cannibal feast, long dismissed as Roman slander, now appears to have been a grim but controlled response to famine, framed as communion rather than chaos. Carthage wasn't a cautionary tale, it was a mirror. Every civilization has its shadows: Rome's gladiatorial games, Aztec heart extractions, the burning of witches. What made Carthage different wasn't the violence, but the honesty with which they ritualized it. So what's left of Carthage today? Not just crumbling ruins or whispered legends, but a question that lingers like smoke from one of their pyres: how do we judge the past? Do we measure it by our standards, or try to understand its own? Those bronze bull roarers and shattered mirrors weren't just tools, they were the language of a people who believed the divine spoke in screams and reflections. And perhaps that's the real shock, not how alien Carthage seems, but how familiar. Now it's your turn. Which ritual left you most unsettled or surprised? Was it the strategic horror of the blood moat, or the eerie intimacy of the wine of the dead? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you're hungry for more ancient mysteries, let me know which civilization we should explore next. After all, history isn't just about answers, it's about learning which questions to ask.